Hello, my name is Madison, and I'm 34 years old. My biggest dream growing up was to be a journalist, or at least work with magazines. I had a flair for writing, and I became pretty well versed with trends. So it came as no shock when I pursued journalism and media in college. After I graduated, I steadily moved from one firm to another, but none of them were the big tabloids. I didn't mind because I was doing something that I dreamed of doing for years. Eventually, I landed in a pretty big firm, and I felt like I had finally achieved the best that I could. A good few years had passed since graduating college, and at around 28, I met my husband, Scott. Scott came from a pretty wealthy family that had their own business. I'm only mentioning this because his mother, Tricia, always hated and insulted me because she believed I was of a lower status than him, so I shouldn't have married him. Anyway, Scott and I dated for around 3 years before we decided to tie the knot. Like I said, Tricia, Scott's mother, was not happy with me. She always belittled me and made fun of the fact that I worked for a magazine and had a degree in journalism. I was pretty hurt and upset at first, because that is no way to treat anyone. But for some reason, Tricia thought it was okay to do that to me. Scott always stood up for me against his mother, and his father, Fred, also stood up for me whenever he was around to hear the things that Tricia said. I was grateful for both of them. But as the months wore on, I began to get used to Tricia's insults. Scott had even proposed we go low contact with her initially, but I didn't agree with that. Scott worked with his father, and if he stopped talking to his mother, that might make things awkward for Fred. Fred was truly an amazing person, and I didn't want him to be put in a position like that. I also didn't want Scott to cut his family off because of me. I learned to be okay with it, mostly because we only ever met Tricia twice a month at most. But that changed when Fred had to go overseas for some business project. Tricia made a big deal about not wanting to be alone, and so Scott and I agreed to let her stay with us until Fred got back. I had a gut feeling that I would regret it, but in my head, family always came first. Of course, it was hell to live with her when she constantly scrutinized and criticized everything I did, along with the insults that I had thrown in my face at all times. But I didn't mind all that as long as she never actually caused any damage to me. That changed, though, during one fateful week. I had a pretty big presentation coming up. We were redesigning a particular section of our magazine, and I was in charge of providing a good redo. That presentation was going to be the one that would decide if I was going to get a promotion. Of course, Tricia didn't know why it was important. I doubt her knowing would have changed her perception of me anyway. Since Tricia was staying with us, she saw just how stressed out I was about it. The night before my big presentation, I was talking to Scott about how anxious I was about my presentation when she overheard us and walked into the living room and decided to give her input. Mom, we're kind of having a private conversation right now," Scott said. "Well, Madison, I just wanted to say that you have nothing to worry about. You most definitely do not have the skill set for anything, so you will most probably do bad tomorrow," Tricia remarked. "Excuse me," I interjected. "Look, just treat it as an opportunity to just stop working and become a housewife. At least that way you'll be deserving of my son. I can't believe he actually married a journalist," Tricia continued. "Mom, you are severely overstepping boundaries right now. Get out," Scott demanded. "You know what? I have no time for your nonsense, Tricia." "I have bigger things to worry about than your opinion of me and my relationship with your son," I retorted. "How dare you speak to me that way?" Tricia snapped. "Oh, so it's okay for you to speak to me that way but not the other way around? Scott, say something. Your wife is back talking to your mother," Tricia accused. "She's simply standing up for herself. I see nothing wrong with it. You brainwashed him. Look at how you can so easily turn your back on family. Madison will regret this," Scott defended. I was fuming at the audacity that Trisha had to just barge into Scott and my conversation and insult me so blatantly. Scott obviously tried to apologize for his mother's behavior, but I stopped him before he could. He was not responsible for his mother's hurtful behavior. We decided to call it a night after that and went to sleep. I was way too focused on everything else going on to even think about Trisha's threat towards me. I figured that her threat only meant her tormenting more, which honestly I didn't care about at that moment. That was a battle to fight after my presentation. The next day, I rushed into work with my laptop in hand. When I opened it, I immediately realized that something was wrong. All of the files that had been there on my desktop were missing. A quick look through my laptop made me realize that it had been reformatted. I obviously began panicking. I had emailed the presentation to myself, so I tried to calm down with that thought. I logged into my email account only to see all, and I mean all, my emails deleted. Even the trash was emptied. I felt my heart sink, and tears sprang to my eyes. I felt fear like no other in that moment. I had to go up to my boss and explain my predicament to him, and he was not happy with me. I had to listen to him yell at me for a good while before I was told to not bother with the presentation because he had already had someone else handle it in case. I messed up. I knew at that moment that any opportunity for me to grow in that company had been squashed. I couldn't believe that that was what my life had come to. I rushed back home in tears. Scott hadn't left for work yet, but on seeing my state, he took the day off. He wrapped his arms around me and let me cry for a while. When I calmed down a little, he asked me what happened. "What happened, darling? Did the presentation go that bad?" he inquired. "There was no presentation to begin with. At least not one that I gave," I replied. "Huh? What do you mean? You worked so hard on that. You barely slept those past few days because you were preparing so hard for it," Scott said, puzzled. "I know. But when I got there, I opened my laptop only to see that the entire thing had gotten reformatted," I explained. "What? How did that happen?" Scott asked, shocked. "I have no idea. It was so embarrassing and humiliating to have to explain that to my boss," I sighed. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry that this happened to you. What did your boss say?" Scott asked, concern evident in his voice. "Well, he yelled at me a bunch for being unprofessional and lazy. He had someone else take care of the presentation. But you still have your job, right?" I replied. "I do, but I'm going to be stuck in this position at this company. There's no way I can earn any promotions or climb the ladder. I'm done here," I concluded. "Oh, honey, I'm sure you'll find a better job. I'll be by your side through it all. Don't you worry about a thing. You just keep working here until you feel like it's appropriate to quit," Scott reassured me. "Yeah, I'll give in my 6 weeks notice right now. I can't believe I did all of that, and just when I almost had what I wanted, it slipped right through my fingers," I lamented. I was pretty depressed after that, if I'm being honest. I take pride in my ability to deliver good results on all my projects, and to have something this jarring happen to me was traumatic, to say the least. I wasn't handed any more big projects or even good projects at work. I had held back giving in my notice, but after another week of working there, I knew that my time was actually done. I handed in my notice and just waited until my time there was done. In all of this, Trish seemed to be oddly gleeful. She once again happened to walk by our room and saw me crying after I had rushed back home. Scott told her to leave us alone, but she looked happy. She kept making remarks about how she had told me that I would bomb the presentation. At first, I was very resentful of her, and then I began to think about her behavior a little more. Sure, one of the reasons she could have been really happy was that I was finally going to become a housewife after I was done working with the company. or she was happy because she had something to do with my mishap that led to me having my career ruined. I don't know how to explain it exactly. But I had this feeling in my gut that told me that she had something to do with my laptop being reformatted and my files deleted. I wanted to approach Scott about it, but I didn't want to go to him without at least some evidence. I needed to figure out just how I was going to prove that Trish did something. I figured that I could just set her up. But before that, I got myself a hidden camera to set up in the office so I could capture Trish sabotaging me. I ordered myself a camera that looked like a smoke detector and placed it on the ceiling. I connected it to my phone, and I was ready to go with my plan. The next part was somehow only informing Trish about my upcoming presentation. That wasn't very hard to do. All I had to do was pace around in the office and look worried. Scott was still at work, and he had no real way of knowing what was going on. Trish saw me pacing around and walked in to ask me what was going on. "What's going on? Why do you look so anxious?" Trish asked. "Another project. Sha. Look, I need to tell someone about this. And since you asked, I've been given another opportunity to present my stuff, and I could be given a raise," I explained. "Oh, really?" Trish remarked. "Yeah, and I'm really anxious about it because this really is my last time to make things right, and I have to do this properly," I continued. "Why aren't you telling Scott about this? Is it because your job is embarrassing?" Trish sneered. "No, it's because I don't want to get his hopes up. I feel like I disappointed him last time, and I don't want to do it again." "Just keep it between the both of us?" "Yeah," I replied. "I'm not making any promises about that. Although it'll be really fun to watch you crumble again tomorrow." Trish smirked. "Why do you always wish for my downfall?" I asked. "I just think that you're better suited to being a housewife. That's way less embarrassing than whatever you're doing right now," Trish retorted. "You know what? I don't have time for this, nor do I care about what you think about me. Please just leave me alone to practice my presentation before Scott gets back home," I said, dismissing her. Trish left, but not before eyeing my laptop and smirking at me. I felt it in my bones that something was up. I waited a little while longer in the office and only walked away when Scott got back home. Trish kept her mouth shut about my presentation, but she kept smirking at me during dinner. After Scott and I returned to bed, I opened the footage of the office on my phone and kept watch on it in case I saw any movement. Scott and I watched a couple of episodes of a TV series, like we did every night. There wasn't any movement until midnight. I watched as Trish entered the office. I immediately drew Scott's attention to my phone screen. Scott looked confused at first, but he watched as Trish got into my laptop and began messing around until my laptop shut off and restarted. Scott looked at me for an explanation, and I explained to him what I had done. To say he was enraged that Trish would be an understatement. Trish was still in the office because she decided to stick around and snoop through my stuff. Scott got off the bed and stormed into the office. He threw open the door, and Trish paled when she saw him. Scott did try his best to remain calm, so he just asked her what she was doing in the office. "What are you doing in the office, Mom?" Scott asked. "Oh, I wasn't doing anything," Trish lied. "Oh, really? And why is Madison's laptop still open? Are you accusing me of going through her stuff?" Scott countered. "I think you did way more than that, Mom. First of all, I only walked in here because I thought that room needed cleaning. And secondly, you know your wife is stupid. She probably just forgot to shut her laptop," Trish replied. "You fought to clean the office at 12 a.m. Also, don't you dare talk about Madison that way. You don't talk to me that way. You may be a grown man, but I'm still your mother," Scott retorted. "Yeah, my mother who loves to hurt and sabotage my wife. "What are you talking about?" Scott fired back. "We caught you on camera resetting Madison's laptop." "You were spying on me," I interjected. "No, we just thought that we should take extra cautionary measures to make sure that what happened with Madison never happened again," Scott explained. "That's disgusting. How dare you film me without my consent?" Trish yelled. "I didn't put up any cameras in your room. I put it in my office, and you entered it without my consent. Also, even if it was disgusting, it's nowhere near as disgusting as what you did to Madison. I want you out of our house first thing in the morning," Scott demanded. "But I'll be all alone," Trish pleaded. "I don't care. I don't want to talk to you," Scott replied firmly. The next morning, Trish tried to stall around by helping make breakfast and clean the dishes. But Scott was not having any of it. As soon as she was done washing the dishes, Scott came downstairs with her 2 bags. He told her that he had packed her things for her and ordered her an Uber. Trish tried to beg him to stay and even began crying, which was a very weird experience considering she was usually the one who made others cry. Scott left her standing there and went to our room. Trish turned to me and began yelling at me for setting her up. I told her that if there was anyone that should be yelling, it was me. She's lucky that I haven't released the footage to all her friends and family. But if she overstepped, I would make sure that everyone saw it. If there was one thing that all her friends and family were big on, it was being kind. If they found out what she had done to me, she would lose them all. There was no way that she would risk that, so she immediately shut up. After Trish left, I felt a lot lighter. I was still upset about my work situation, but I knew that I could bounce back and do better than I did before. Scott was the biggest help in my entire journey to where I finally reached. Once my notice period was over, I took some time off to not only rest, but also calibrate which direction I wanted to head in. The next few months were spent taking a bunch of courses on other niches in my field. I knew that if I focused on a particular niche, and if I landed the right job, I could earn a lot more. I didn't want to expose Trish, but after years of her belittling me, I knew that she had to face some consequences. I wanted to rub it in her face, just what I was capable of doing. I wanted to reach the heights that even she never got to see, and that's exactly what I did. Steve helped put in a good word for me in multiple places. The best thing that came out of being rich was the sheer number of connections that one has at their disposal. Thanks to my experience and all the help that Scott gave me, I managed to land a position of chief editor in a very, very big men's magazine. I'm talking about a worldwide big-name magazine. The work was hard, but it was all worth it. Somewhere in my journey to becoming the chief editor, I forgot how I wanted to show Trisha what I was capable of. In fact, in those months, we hadn't had any contact with her. I knew that Scott still spoke with his father because, well, they worked together. But Scott hadn't heard much from or about his mother. His father, Fred, told him that she was upset at us about something but refused to tell him what. At least Trisha took my warning seriously. But I had to meet her eventually, and it just so happened that my company was throwing a huge party for which a lot of big names were invited, including Trisha and Fred. Scott and I dressed to the nines because for the first time, we were both people who were big names. When we got to the venue, we were immediately spotted by Trisha and Fred. They waved us over, and we greeted them. Trisha looked me up and down before smirking. "Wow, look at you, trying to fit in," Trisha remarked. "Don't listen to a word she says, Madison. You look lovely, like you always do." "Thanks a lot, Fred." "So how have you been, Madison?" "Yeah, how's unemployment been treating you?" Trisha jabbed. "You're unemployed," Fred chimed in. "Oh yeah, she had a whole blunder with her job, and they let her go. I'd always talked about how she's unfit for our son. Look at her, she can't even hold down a job," Tricia continued. That's enough, Mom. Stop taking her side. It's sad enough that I have to see her everywhere we go. I wouldn't have to do that if you just left her like I told you to, Scott interjected. Okay, that's enough. You either stop talking or I'm leaving, I declared. But Madison, sweetie, let me know if you need a job, okay? It would be a pleasure to work with you, Fred offered. That is such a kind thing of you to offer, Fred. But I'm afraid that I can't take you up on the offer, I declined. Figures. I told you she's lazy and incompetent, Tricia scoffed. Just then my name was called, and people started cheering. I looked towards the small stage, and the CEO was there, waving at me and beckoning me over to the stage. I turned towards Fred and Tricia and excused myself. Fred looked amused, while Tricia looked confused and angry. The CEO was giving his speech, and in it, he commended me for my good work in the company. He praised me for my talents and ability to reinvent and bring forth a new aspect to the magazine. The audience cheered very loudly for me and asked for a speech from me. Of course, I had to thank Scott for always being by my side, and all the people who worked with me, without which the magazine wouldn't exist. I ended my speech by thanking the one person who did not believe in me and constantly put me down because without their constant negativity, I would never have pushed myself to be better. When I walked off stage, everyone stopped me to talk to me, and I also got asked a lot of questions about who the unnamed hater was, but I kept that to myself. I made my way over to the table at which Fred, Tricia, and Scott were seated. Scott gave me the tightest hug and congratulated me, and Fred got up to hug me too. Tricia looked at me with anger. Oh, Madison, sweetie, this is amazing. I definitely see why you wouldn't want to come to work with us. Thanks, Fred. Although I will admit that if you had sprung that offer around 6 months ago, I would have taken it, I responded. You should have taken Fred up on his offer. At least then you'd get paid more, Tricia sneered. Paid more? Honey, I could never do that. Right, she's not worth all that money, I replied. No, I don't mean that. I mean that I could never match what she gets paid right now, Fred explained. What? Oh yeah, she has way more money than either Scott or I could ever see in our lifetime. That can't be possible. You must be wrong, Tricia protested. He's not wrong, Mom. I really did mean it when I thanked you, just so you know. You've been nothing short of a bully to me, and I hope that seeing me be way more successful than anyone in your family stings, I retorted. Oh, look, I have more important people to talk to. You have to excuse Scott and me, Fred. Feel free to. Come up to us whenever. Goodbye, Tricia, I said as Scott and I left a dumbfounded Tricia at the table. I had never felt more alive and satisfied in my life. It truly was an amazing feat that I had accomplished, and I was proud of where I got. I'm also very grateful to Scott for standing by me. Thank you for listening.